So they made some changes this year that I hopefully will alleviate that problem. But, this problem could have been alleviated years ago if they were listening to the students.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs-to-be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. This is Season 16, Episode 3, and today my guest is Jason Anderson, a fifth-year PhD student in aeronautics and astronautics at Stanford University. Thanks to his work experience prior to grad school, Jason developed an unusual ability to read legalese and view every no as a starting point for negotiation. Both as a part of the Graduate Student Council and independently, he has advocated for changes to the benefits Stanford offers to its graduate students, particularly with respect to retirement accounts, healthcare options, transit, and income tax on fellowships. Jason and I have a lively conversation regarding the history and current status of these benefits at Stanford and at other universities, culminating in Jason's advice to other grad student advocates and personal financial advice for all graduate students. You'll hear in the second half of this interview that Jason and I dive into some of the issues regarding fellowship income and taxes, which, as you know, is one of my favorite subjects. By happenstance, we recorded this interview in late September 2023, and in early October, about a week before this episode publishes, I'm scheduled to give my new webinar, How to Not Hate Your Fellowship During Tax Season, for Stanford. I'm crossing my fingers that it really helps alleviate the stress of the grad students and postdocs and is received well, like it has been the other times I've given it. If you'd like to bring that webinar in particular to your institution this fall, or any of my pre-recorded tax workshops now or during tax season, just reach out. I would be happy to chat with you and give you more information that you can take to your graduate school or postdoc office to ask for this kind of support. You can reach me at emily@pfforphds.com or read more about these offerings at pfforphds.com/tax-workshops. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S16E3. Without further ado, here's my interview with Jason Anderson. I'm so excited to have joining me on the podcast today, Jason Anderson. He is a fifth-year PhD student in aeronautics and astronautics at Stanford University. And Jason was actually connected to me by some of my contacts at Stanford who are hosting me for a webinar at the time of this recording. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. And they told me that Jason is the person to talk to about some of the financial policy questions and concerns that the students may have. So that's kind of going to be our topic for the podcast today, the advocacy work and the areas that Jason sees room for improvement in terms of financial policies at Stanford and possibly at your institution as well. So Jason, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. It's a pleasure to talk with you here. And will you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really glad that I'm going to be able to share this knowledge. I'm really excited to help graduate students get everything they deserve. So, as you said, I'm a fifth-year aeronautics and astronautics PhD student. My research pertains to augmenting GPS signals with cryptography in a way that is efficient and manageable. GPS signals have been around for a while, and cryptography requires a lot of data. So that's what my research is about. And my hobbies would definitely be emailing administrators to get them to do things that the grad students need, blow off steam. That does come from some of my background working in the legal field for a while, writing those nice, crisp emails.
Let's talk more about that experience that you had prior to starting graduate school. So you were working in the legal field to some degree. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so before Stanford, I went to UC Berkeley, go Bears, and I needed to make a lot of money for my out-of-state education to be able to afford that. I was a freshman engineer and applying to all of these jobs to try and get myself an internship. So I'd have that income. One of the check boxes on one of those large websites was a legal intern. And so the only job that returned to 19-year-old Jason was that legal job. And it turned out to be a really interesting experience for me. I worked there for uh, between 3 and 4 years actually as a telecommuter, working lots and lots and lots of hours. And I was functioned as an executive assistant, which scheduling meetings, phone calls, but also my mentor allowed me to learn a lot about legal things. I spent a lot of time reading agreements and reading laws, trying to I don't know. So there's this not to be cliche, but there's this Sun Tzu person who wrote The Art of War, and his main mantra was the supreme art of war is to wage war without fighting. And so that was a big context for me in the law, trying to use and pick pieces together of strategy of trying to fix issues using that. And then, so that sort of prepared me for a lot of the advocacy work today. And then after that experience, I worked at a different defense contractor and then came to Stanford. And, so I have served as in the student government here. I had no interest in student government in my undergrad, and it was not until I needed things that I became interested, like with regards to healthcare, retirement, transit, a bunch of other benefits that I wanted that I didn't have. So I came into that quest to get them. So Stanford just voted to unionize, and I am involved with that. Our union, SGWU, is undertaking a lot of these issues to help graduate students afford living. Um, Here at Stanford, there are a lot of issues with affordability because Stanford is a very high cost area to live. We have a lot of people going to the food pantry, especially partners with children, you name it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that Stanford is affordable. And that's part of what I've been working on as my hobby project, I suppose. Pretty serious hobby, but I still work full time as a graduate student.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about that experience. And we'll get into talking about these specific benefits in a moment. But I just wondered if you could really explicitly make this connection between having this experience, being able to read legal documents and grappling with that kind of language, and how you've been able to employ that past experience and that skill in asking for, finding, advocating for the things that you and your peers need.
Well, so I'd say that the first sort of thing that comes to mind is like the grit to even though when somebody says no to you, it's not actually a no. Like for instance, one of the items we're going to talk about is retirement, and when we get to there, we'll talk about someone gave me a legal opinion that turned out to be false. When someone says no to me, um, it's just not no. There's still ways. There's still a way that you can talk. There's a way to position yourself to respond back in such a way because Stanford or pretty much any school administrator is counting on you going away. Like, right? So students are there in and out, and if you can just persist just a little bit, you'll be 100 times more successful. Let's see, there are a lot of student government things that come to mind. Like, I got food trucks to come onto campus. That was quite the ordeal. First someone said, "Well, we can't do this because these four different departments need to approve." Like the infrastructure, and then parking, transit, and then fire, and then police, and then these other things. And anyway, so the persistence comes from being able to respond back even when somebody says no, but also to read the documents. Because someone says no to me, and I'm like, well, can you point to me the written rule of why somebody is saying no? And they might not be able to point to a written rule. What they want you to do is they're just so used to saying, oh, I can just say no to this person, and they won't question. And then, there are a couple of times where somebody says no to me. I ask them where in the rules it says that, and then they're like, "Oh, well, we considered." Um, so yeah, so being able to essentially means where can I appeal, right? If you know how to appeal well, then yeah. So
Yeah, it's kind of appealing or negotiating and also like asking for your source. Like if you're telling me there is a rule, okay, I'd like to take a look at it myself. Would you send me the link? Would you send me the document?
yeah,
I found the same thing
every
that people have an impression of what rules are, and that's actually not literally how it's written, or they've misinterpreted maybe what was written, and there's another way to interpret it. Yeah.
everything's sort of like a game of chicken when you're trying to spar with someone. So their game of chicken is, oh, I just said no, they'll go away. My game of chicken is, I need the rule, and they're gonna have to do the work to find the rule, and then they're gonna realize I don't want to do that anymore, and it's easier just to let me get what I want. So anyway,
I like what you said though about like oftentimes administrators, I mean, I don't like to ascribe ill will to people if it's not very, very, very obvious that that's what's going on. But a lot of times people are just overloaded and it's easier to say no or just dismiss you or whatever because it would create more work for them. But if it's really important to you and important to your peers, then you should both try to come to a solution together that's mutually appealing.
it helps I don't take things personally on these types of issues. I'm not someone who takes things personally, so it's cold water on a duck's back to me, but I can still write that email to respond back. But yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into these enticing areas of negotiation and pushback that we talked about before. So, I want to hear about your kind of personal experiences working with or against or whatever the Stanford administration in these four areas. Okay, we're going to talk about retirement. We're going to talk about healthcare, transit, and then income tax withholding / estimated tax. So let's start up at the top with retirement. Can you give me a summary of what's going on right now and what you have tried to ask for, what you've tried to advocate for?
Well, so I have the privilege of having some extra income. Not everybody at Stanford has that, but one of my goals is to save 15% of my income. If you start early, this is what Fidelity says, you don't only need 15%, but a Roth IRA isn't sufficient for that. And, I think retirement is more like a public health issue. So in that you should have it deducted and not think about it because if it's not there, then people aren't going to do it. So that's why I think the employer deduction is really important.
That's why people are moving to opt-in system, or rather opt-out systems rather than
That's
opt-in
right.
systems at a
Yeah.
normal type of workplace.
Yes, and then also my first year, I needed to borrow from my retirement from my company because I was in a cash flow pinch for about 3 months. And I was able to do that because I was still employed. I was simultaneously employed. If I weren't simultaneously employed, then I wouldn't have that. You have all these graduate students who are super cash poor, but a lot of them work between undergrad and graduate. So, if Stanford provided this retirement benefit, then, a lot of things happen. You can do that public health savings, you can borrow from it, and the benefit is very cheap. So, for instance, another company I work for, I know that the price per participant is about $4 per month, and that's actually a very expensive plan. So what my knowledge is that I know this is very cheap and it's extremely beneficial. I mean, it's essentially helping graduate students avoid taxes from the federal government, right? Or avoiding shark loans,
Absolutely.
like payday loans.
And furthermore, I mean, Stanford and every university already operates a 403B plan at a minimum. And that's the plan we're talking about here for the listener. We're talking about expanding access to the 403B plan that the university already has for its employees and its faculty and everybody to the graduate students who are also employees. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. 401, 403B, 403B for my institution because I guess we're exempt from income tax. But yeah.
Yeah. And so you're saying, yeah, just what you said. Like if a student came in, let's say they had a 401k or 403b at a prior employer, and they were able to roll it into Stanford's 403b plan, and they're currently an employee at Stanford, then like you did, they would be able to take a loan or, well, withdrawal could happen either way, but a loan against the 403b and then be able to pay it back gradually over time to alleviate the cash flow crisis. As you said, that is so common, especially at the start of graduate school. Very, very expensive transition. Generally speaking, they're not helping you at all or very much. So absolutely, that makes sense. And as you said, to continue the, I think it's partially like a mindset thing, like because 403Bs are not typically offered to graduate students, it's not on their mind. It's like an out of sight, out of mind thing about saving for retirement. And as you said, if possible, saving something like, a few percentage is fine, but up to 15% would be an amazing goal to be able to accomplish during graduate school. And without the employer support on that, it's easy to put it on the back burner. It takes a lot more initiative to open up an IRA, separately from what's going on at work.
Yeah, and the only reason why it was on my mind is because my alma mater, Berkeley, does this already, right? And so, there are institutions out there that do this. So.
Okay, and so what communications did you have with the administration regarding the 403B?
So, student government is its own thing, and so on the docket list of priorities, the retirement was at the bottom one, okay, because there's more important issues, okay, but it's also costs the employer nothing. Postdocs already have this, okay, so this is like at the bottom of the list. We're hoping that they'll give us the crumbs or whatever, right? So when I pursued this avenue of advocacy several years ago, the response was, well, so if we give you this plan, then you'll lose your FICA tax exemption. So just for your readers, graduate students and students in general do not have to pay FICA taxes, and which is 7.5% off of your paycheck for Social Security and Medicare. So it's like, oh wow, well, we wouldn't want to give up 7.5% of our paycheck, so I can have the option of putting 1% away, right? Well, so, that's where the legal experience comes in. I'm like, well, they said no for a very good reason to me. And so I go through and read the IRS law, and I look up, let's say I pull up the document just in case, document number 9167, and on page 24, the IRS provides a comically helpful example that explicitly explains that graduate students can participate in a 403B plan and not be FICA exempt. This is like, so, that tenacity I'm talking about, well, I read that document from page 1 through page 30, right? It takes a lot of gumption, I think, just to read through really boring topics like this, and it turned out to be helpful. So then, as a student government, I got some pro bono advice from a retirement lawyer. After I wrote my own opinion, I had the lawyer look over it, and then I sent back this demand letter that says, what you said is not true. And no, we should be able to get this. And then, so then after that, they're like, oh, well, nobody would use it. And, the survey data that I have of my constituents shows that that's not the case. People would, in fact, use it. But, I'm hoping that a different organization, hopefully our union, will be able to win that. But, there's a lot of other priorities, too.
Okay, so that's the current status of, you think you're in the right here. At least their excuse number one was not a valid excuse. I haven't looked at this myself. It's very interesting to me. I'll have to check this out after the end of the podcast interview. And that's where it stands right now. You've knocked down their argument, but no further progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think food insecurity and affordable housing and healthcare are much more important issues. But, 2 years ago when I was working on this, I was, Thursday evening, I'm like, we're doing my research, and I'm like, oh, thank you, IRS. They like, let me give you an example, like student J is this, blah, 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 blah. No, they are exempt from FICA, which I think was kind of comical. But yeah, they didn't do their homework, or they were lying to me to get me to go away. I mean, who knows? I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, I think it's clear, and Berkeley and other universities are able to do it. So,
Yeah, I mean, I agree in terms of like basic needs, paying people enough that they don't have to access food pantries and be housing insecure and all these things. Very important. But there's also like the optics on, hey, like let's treat grad students like they're real employees and give them real benefits that other people have in other places. It's quite standard. So there's that aspect of it as well. But thank you for filling us in about that, because I am quite sure that many, many grad students around the country would also like to use their university's 403Bs, and, maybe they can get a little budge on this, like you haven't so far not been able to, but good efforts. Should we move on to the second topic of healthcare, health insurance?
Yeah, so Stanford, your readers can Google Stanford bill on affordability, and I wrote with my colleagues in the Graduate Student Council like a 10-page document explaining why Stanford is not very affordable. But one of those things is healthcare. We have the most expensive student healthcare plan that I can find. And then one of the things that is expensive about it is that Stanford students, rain or shine, have to pay $1,000 per year for their primary health care. I do think the other universities have similar fees, but they're covered by their tuition. So I do have family who are healthcare administrators, and I've participated in healthcare advisory boards. So it's typical for an employee, a large organization, to have advisors on benefits. Stanford faculty have this. Berkeley students have this. We're still working on Stanford students, but essentially the students come together and they advise on what benefits should they have. Like, oh, graduate students need wisdom tooth surgery because we're young, or prescription eyeglasses would be nice. At Stanford, they're not covered. Things like that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a cost positive or neutral. The point is that people should have a say because they pay into the plan. And the administrators, I think, don't have the best knowledge. The students have the best knowledge. So that's something I've been fighting for more than 2 years. I mean, retirement is probably the interesting thing about the taxes and whatever, but that's the thing I've been working on for a long time. So, like, for instance, Stanford recently changed, and they budged just a smidge on allowing student advice on that topic, but they retracted, actually. So we're still fighting for it back. But essentially, the advice that I was able to talk about is, students want an app to use their healthcare, because last year, in order to get claims processed, you had to mail in the claims, and pulling your hair out. Like, I don't know, maybe your readers have an app for their healthcare, right? So I had an app for my parents when I was on my parents' insurance, and then furthermore, the plan is a very high level plan, which sort of prices out most of everybody. The only people who are on the plan have it subsidized. So, the professional students are really hurting right now, because they might be over the age of 26, and their only healthcare options are Obamacare or Medi-Cal, or this plan that Stanford offers. So I'm really that's something that we've been asking for, and I think we're going to get it with the union, but I wish that Stanford was as good as Berkeley. So I'm wearing my Stanford shirt, but Berkeley's been doing this for years, and I wish Stanford would catch up on this regard.
Well, it's good to have a nearby, peer type institution to compare to and say, what are the best practices that we can take from over there and share back and forth? I think in our prior conversation, you mentioned to me that the annual premium, if I'm remembering correctly, for like a single person enrolled on the health insurance plan was like $7,000. Is that right?
Yeah. So the aggregate expenses are 68 plus 1,000. So I think about 77 to 7,800. And if you have a student partner with a child, the premiums are 12 grand a year, at least. 12 grand last year, might be 13 this year. So to me, there's been issues with the plan, because it's in a low participant. It's apparently in a spiral out of control, and you wonder why it's so expensive that nobody can afford to use it. Yeah, to me, that price is like, please go away. That's what the premium says. Please go away. And then especially to our Stanford international students who bring partners and children, and they have visa restrictions preventing them from getting other jobs. Those are the people who are at the food pantry every month because they're just doing their best in such unconscionable circumstances.
I can confirm, when you said that number to me in our previous call, that really raised a red flag for me that was very high compared to what I hear at other institutions. I want to say, I mean, I was in grad school some number of years ago. but I want to say it was like $2,000 to $3,000 for the year for the premium for one person. So yeah, a very different price level between those two. So that's interesting that okay, so you're saying it's an under enrolled plan because the price is so high, which causes the price to go higher. So it's like in sort of a death spiral. But the competition, let's say, okay, if you're a student, you can enroll in this plan. If you're still under age 26, maybe you can enroll in your parents' plan, or maybe you have a spouse. There's other places people can go. But then that last resort is like the ACA exchange, right? Versus the Stanford plan.
Yeah, and what's sad about that is you lose a bunch of tax subsidies, right? Because that's why your employer pays for your health care. When there are some tax subsidies, I haven't done my research into it, but I mean, it's really structured that your employer should pay for this, and also the plan here is for the facilities nearby. If you go ACA, who knows where you're going to be, and especially those international students who are like coming into this healthcare system and don't know what is going on. Um, but yeah, and part of the reason why the plan is so expensive is because all Stanford, pretty much all the healthcare, you have to go to the hospital. And Stanford Hospital is a nice hospital, but it's impacted. So like I tried to get an appointment, 9-month waiting time for myself, So they made some changes this year that I hopefully will alleviate that problem. But this problem could have been alleviated years ago if they were listening to the students. Yeah. And I'll also say a lot of this is my opinion. So take that with every grain of salt.
Absolutely. Okay, so the idea here is to get a committee, a group that advises on the healthcare plan. And right now, you're voicing a main concern is it's very expensive and it's driving people away.
Yeah, and I'm not the only voice. I mean, people talk about the mental health issues. There's the minority disparities in healthcare that, my family members talk about that I think are insane. This is the type of feedback that needs to come in. And I think the best way to resolve it is to have everybody speak their own voice. And I'm just one voice. That's why it needs to be a committee.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, goal setting, investing, frugality, increasing income, or student loans, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer seminars and workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats, and I'm now booking for the 2023-2024 academic year. If you'd like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/speaking or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutions enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview. Third on our list is transit. Tell us what you've been doing on that front.
Stanford took away free transit benefits in May, so June, and people are very angry about that. So I'm hoping.
Are we talking about on Stanford's campus, like buses, or are we talking about trains, or what level of transit?
Yeah, so rent is very, very expensive in Palo Alto. I don't know if you've heard. There's a train that is very convenient that Stanford used to purchase the monthly pass for, and so I'd like to see that return. Furthermore, like on the subject of retirement benefits costing them nothing, every employee at Stanford has access to purchase those tickets pre-tax, which is an effective 30% discount to Stanford students, right? So yet another payroll benefit that costs them almost nothing that they could extend so that their employees get thousands of dollars of rebates. So I would say that is the transit element that I would like to see happen.
Plus the environmental benefits of incentivizing using public transit over other forms of transportation.
Absolutely. As part of, the Stanford just inaugurated a new school called the Doerr School of Sustainability. So yes, I totally agree with those arguments, although I am a little bit focused on the taxes because I am a little bit biased on, on that regard. But, yeah.
Great. All right, fourth topic, and one of my favorites, the lack of income tax withholding on paychecks for non-employees who are U.S. citizens and residents for tax purposes. And for that group, the possible requirement to pay estimated tax. So this is the issue that you and I first got connected over. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you've been talking about on that front with the administration.
Stanford is an educational institution, and I think it is on them to educate their students on their taxes. So one of the things I've been working with Graduate Student Council are these tax office hours, well, where the student government will purchase the CPA's time and will, explain how to how to do this. Students really don't know. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a high school district that like literally made every single 18-year-old senior file taxes by hand in like a dummy scenario. So like you can go to the post office and get your tax forms. I didn't know that, right? So I came in knowing every single dollar that I earn, I have to pay tax. A lot of people don't know that. So at the office hours, you have a wide breadth. You'll have your international student who's dealing with tax treaties and all sorts of stuff. And then your domestic student this is their first time in their entire life that they've earned income, and it's a fellowship and they don't get their W-2. It's not, TurboTax can't handle it. TurboTax and professionals will get the advice wrong on certain aspects. So one of the things that I was fortunate enough to get Stanford to do is to take a stance on healthcare fees, the taxability of healthcare subsidies on fees. So a lot of students at Stanford, which is like really why I'm excited to talk to you today, are falsely paying taxes on their health insurance stipends. So they get charged at Stanford $7,800 a year, and some people's is partially subsidized, and then it's reported funky on the 1098-T, and 1098-T is not an income tax statement. It's just a education benefits or deduction and credits, right? And graduate students aren't taking those deductions and credits. It's really the wrong form for them. So, Stanford has an affordability issue, but, I'm so glad that Stanford talked to you. I mean, the reason why they're hiring you for this is I'm hoping, so we can save graduate students $3,000 of taxes a year, right? We have an affordability crisis where people are going to the food pantry every month with their wagons and children. This is $3,000 that they don't have to be paying, right? And so, when I was student government, the head of the student government is paying the CPA like $500 for their time, right? And then you've got 100 people coming in; they're over full, and each one of them is saving thousands of dollars, right? This is like the retirement transit, but this tax stuff is probably the easiest way that Stanford can take initiative and stop all of this. Years ago when I was starting my advocacy on this, a Stanford person told me that the interest and penalties that students pay every April, that's part of their tuition, right? That's part of their tuition. They don't know. They come in, they don't know they need to make estimated payments, and then they get those fees. That's their tuition. It just made me so angry that they could send an email to everybody today. But this is an example of tenacity where Stanford's like, it's not my problem. I don't want to be liable, whatnot, right? But that's not true. Okay, they can say this is what a typical student does. My high school in Marietta, Georgia, explained to us how to file taxes in a theoretical scenario. Stanford can do it too. I'm really glad that you're coming in a couple weeks to talk about that. So that's the end of my long rant, but I could go on.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit on several different issues in there, which I think are incredibly important. So let's start with that. Okay, $7,800 in in my framework, it's called awarded income. So it's fellowship, scholarship type income not reported on a W-2. That's what I call awarded income. And as you were saying earlier, awarded income, like you have to assume it's taxable, right? From the outset, you have to assume that it's part of your taxable income, unless you can prove that it went towards paying a qualified education expense, and then it gets to be tax-free. So the argument here is that whether or not a health insurance premium paid, for university health insurance for a student is considered a qualified education expense. And in my opinion, the opinion of the CPA I hired to, work with me on this, it is under limited circumstances where it's required of the student and the student is purchasing it through the university. And that means that premium, or that means that the amount of money that goes towards paying the premium gets to be tax free. And because you all have such a high number on that 7,800, it really makes a big difference to you all, especially. It's going to be a lesser effect at other institutions, but still an effect. And so it is an important thing to know that if you receive a 1098T, that amount of that premium is not going to appear in box one as an right. education expense, because it's not a qualified education expense for the other benefits. As you were saying earlier, the Form 1098T is not designed for the tax-free scholarships and fellowships benefits. It's designed for the lifetime learning credit. It's designed for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, but that's not the one grad students are taking. They're taking tax-free scholarships and fellowships. So anyway, the 1098T is like, okay as far as it goes, but you have to have this inside knowledge that it's not a complete document. It doesn't actually list all your qualified education expenses. And that's a real disconnect. People think they receive it form and it's kind of trustworthy, and it's really not. You have to double check everything on it to make sure that it's complete and accurate for your situation. I'm going on my rant now too.
Yeah, well, so this is why it's really important to read those really dull IRS instructions after having 3.5 years of legal experience. And me, the legal brain's like, well, healthcare is disallowed in sections 2 and 3 for undergrads, but it's not disallowed in section 1 for graduate students. And then you've got a CPA. So like, I'm in the office hours. I'm literally arguing with someone who has their own tax advice over the phone. And I'm like arguing with the professional over this because they're wrong, because professionals get this wrong. And this is why Stanford needs to step up and and take a stance here, because that's a lot of money here. And anyway, it also kind of points to how our government should function, because it shouldn't require years of legal experience to be able to navigate our tax code. But
I totally agree.
We live in.
It's interesting that you and I have kind of come to this in a similar way of just like, I just read the thing. Like, I just sat down and read it like completely. And once you do that a few times over a few years, like, you kind of get used to the language and it's not so intimidating, and you can make those connections. Like, oh, the definition of qualified education expense is different depending on which benefit you're talking about. Oh, the definition of earned income is different depending on which tax benefit you're talking about. But you only pick up on that after, exposure. And as you're saying, it's very hard to find. I mean, this is the experience of my clients. This is why people work with me, is because they can't find a CPA who's versed in this, because it doesn't pay. This is not their typical client base. And so you either have to find a CPA and really educate them, or somehow find a magical unicorn, which I have not found, who is like already well versed in this. But anyway, that's why people end up working with me, because, well, I'm not a CPA, but I have read this and I've really tried over years, including with professional consultations, to understand what's going on. And now I can communicate that.
Yeah, I mean, humans were never meant to read dull IRS instructions documents, so I don't really want to fault them for it, but that's just the world we live in. So
It's tough, especially because even many tax preparers, CPAs included, end up relying on software to prepare the returns, and they're not necessarily deeply analyzing what goes in and what comes out of that software. And if the software, as you said earlier, like TurboTax, is not designed to handle, like, you can do it if you know the tricks, but it's not intuitively designed to handle this income. And so if the software is letting you down, but you don't even know enough to know that it's letting you down, it's a really, really tough area. Oh, I'm getting fired up about this too. I'm like, I need to create a software solution. Okay. Anything else you want to say about this topic of estimated tax, or the reporting, or the taxability of like this fellowship type income?
I just want to add like my one sentence instruction, which is what I do is I go to this website called Smart Asset. I put in my expected income. I ignore the FICA taxes, and I look at the federal income and state income, and I take that number, divide by 4, and that's what you need to be paying every quarter. And if you forget, you're going to be slacked with interest and interest and penalties. The interest rate's high now, so if you get a fellowship, you owe money, even if they don't tell you.
Exactly. And that's the same website that I recommend when I teach this as well. For like, okay, honestly, the best thing to do is to fill out the estimated tax worksheet in Form 1040-ES, but a lot of people don't want to do that. I understand. So that calculator is a really good like substitute. You may be paying more than the bare minimum you're required to, but that's okay. Like if you accidentally overpay a little bit, you'll get a refund at the end of the year. And it's a quick way to get some peace of mind that you're on top of this issue. You're not going to be fined at the end of the year, most likely. So yeah, I really like that suggestion. The other thing that I'll mention, just throw in there for potential future advocacy on your front, is that the university that I went to, Duke, they did withhold income tax on fellowship paychecks and fellowship stipends. I've only heard of a couple of institutions that do that. It's very, very, very rare, but it happened to be that the one that I attended did that. And it causes other complications with reporting, so it's not an easy solution, but they did it somehow.
Stanford told me that they can't withhold, and now that you say that's not true.
No, it's
They
not
don't
true.
have to. They don't have to, but just another reason why it's not my problem. Go away, administrator. But yeah, I mean, I talked to them about this, and it might not be the best solution, but I think it's better. People have their rent deducted, in the tax office hours. They're like, I have this deduction. Why wasn't taxes put in there? And I'm like, well, their rent deduction didn't include a tax deduction. So anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely not impossible, but as I said, it's very, very rare. What ended up happening in my case is that the income then was reported on a 1099 miscellaneous. So they had a box for your amount of income and they had a box for your amount of withholding. They had to use a form that did that because the 1090-T doesn't have a box for how much income was withheld from it. Now, compared to back when I was in graduate school, there are two 1099 options that sometimes gets used for fellowship income. One is the 1099 MIS and one is the 1099 NEC. I'm not sure which Duke is currently using, but I've noticed that some funding agencies end up putting fellowship income on a 1099 NEC, which brings up a whole other issue, which is people confusing their fellowship income with self-employment income, which shouldn't happen. And just PSA to anyone who's listening to this, like, do not allow that to happen on your tax return because the fellowship is not self-employment income, in my opinion.
That's a very
Okay.
expensive mistake.
Incredibly,
That's
I
a very
mean,
expensive mistake. Yeah,
you mentioned the 7.65% for your FICA tax. It's double that, right, for self-employment
that's right.
tax. So huge issue to get into. And actually, I'll reference in the show notes an earlier podcast episode I did with someone who went down that mistake route and had to correct it with the IRS. Okay, so among these four areas that you've been, working on along with student government and some other people, are there any like big takeaways or lessons that you can convey to the listener about like best practices around doing this advocacy around financially related policies on campus?
Again, tenacity to read the documents. I think we've gone through three examples where a Stanford administrator says the wrong thing because it's just not their problem. They want to go away, but IRS instructions twice, and then you know, yeah. So like on our outline here about how to negotiate for better benefits. The first step is to ask, and then when they say no, do your homework with the documents. And I consulted that retirement lawyer and graciously gave me that advice to confirm what I had read in the documents. So um, student governments can engage lawyers, unions can engage lawyers. Get your own advice and stick them with the letter that says no, what you said was false. Oh, and then get it in writing too. Writing is really important because yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that advice, that suggestion, that route to go down. Let's end with the question I ask all my interviewees, which is, what is your best financial advice for another graduate student or another early career PhD? And it could be something that we've touched on already in the interview, or it could be something completely new.
So okay, maybe this might make you chuckle a little bit. So what I do when I file my taxes is I do it redundantly with two softwares, and then I submit it with the free one. I make sure the numbers match, and that's actually debugging that is how I've really learned the tax code of all of this. So and then so don't pay money to corporations that lobby for our taxes to be complicated. So I will not do that. But anyway, and so that's the first piece of advice. And then
Wait, I want to make
yeah,
a small comment on that because I love that suggestion. A lot of people don't know. So I'll mention TurboTax just because I'm more familiar with this software. A lot of people just, input their numbers and then the return is generated and filed. But there's a step before that where you can preview your return. So you preview the 1040 and any other forms that have been generated through that process. And that's what you can compare apples to apples with another software. You also preview the 1040 over there. You get a nice PDF or whatever. And there you can compare line by line to make sure everything matches or see what the discrepancies are. So you don't just have to blindly submit whatever forms this software is generating. You can actually look at the final form before it's submitted.
Yeah, and TurboTax has like the automatic import, so it's not necessarily that you're entering it twice. It can be just a double check.
Very good. Well, I love that suggestion. Also for me, filing my tax returns manually, like literally by hand or through the free fillable form system, was a great education. And I don't know, is the IRS still on track for their own software coming out for upcoming tax season?
I'm so excited.
I know, I'm excited too.
Yeah.
Okay, what was your second suggestion?
There's this Reddit personal finance page with the flow chart on what to do. I would Google that and follow the flow chart. And then one of those things after you've done emergency savings is, Roth IRAs can be a vehicle for your emergency savings under certain circumstances. Because Roth IRAs, you can pull out the contributions, you can put your emergency savings in cash in a Roth IRA or treasury bills if you want to do that low risk. And then, if you have the emergency, you have the emergency. But if you don't have the emergency and 5 years at $6,000, then you'll have $30,000 in your retirement on your Roth IRA when you end, and then you'll go straight into that high income job where you'll not be eligible. So, if you can, I would put your savings in cash in a Roth IRA until you have enough cash to start investing it. But
this is an advanced
optimize
technique.
the tax code.
It's not one that I recommend because I think it's difficult to do. The qualifier that you mentioned is keep it in cash or keep it in a very no risk investment inside the Roth IRA. That's what I think is difficult and where people might not complete this whole process correctly, because it is, to me, very important that you not take any risk with your emergency fund. But yes, you can still keep it inside the Roth IRA. And I love your point of use that eligibility to contribute to the Roth IRA when you have it, because it may not be around forever once you get to those higher paying jobs. So good suggestion, but I want them to listen to your whole suggestion.
Yeah, it's all about the audience here. A Stanford PhD student, you'll find people who are ready to do that advanced topic. I mean, you're graduate students, but yes, you're right. Totally right about that.
Well, Jason, I'm so excited that you agreed to come on the podcast. This was a wonderful interview. I hope that our listeners will take some of what we talked about today and go back to their own institutions and start advocating for some of these same issues or using some of the methods that you mentioned. And I especially loved your tip about basically perseverance, both in reading the documents and doing your homework and also with your communications, because you're going to get told no. And like you said, just it's not personal. Let it roll off your back, come back, do your homework, etc. So this was really, really valuable, I think. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for reaching out, and I want to say good luck to all of your listeners in their financial pursuits and advocacy. And good luck to SGWU as well, because we're gonna fight like hell to get all the things we deserve.
Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? I have collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by Dr. Lourdes Bobbio and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.